Hi there. My name's Tom, and today we're going to be discussing a decision by the United States Supreme Court to refuse to hear a case regarding the New York SAFE Act. The case was challenging one of its key provisions requiring good moral character when it comes to getting your carry permit for your handgun. And that allows the provision to continue standing based upon the previous court rulings, the earlier court rulings. Before we get into why the Supreme Court would allow such a ruling to stand, I want to talk about the Second Amendment. And I have already underlined some things because this is my second take, and rewriting all these block letters hurts my hand. So, what it says is a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Alright, so we're going to start talking about first the people. Because a lot of folks say, well, this applies to well regulated militias. But there's a comma there. And that comma tells me that this is a primary reason for the right's existence. Not the only reason, but a primary reason. And the people is actually defined in constitutional law to refer to individuals. Now, for historical context, 1794, Whiskey Rebellion. George Washington did not have an army to speak of. The budget was tight. That's why the whiskey tax was created. So he had to call the governors of the states, and they mobilized 13,000 militiamen to be led by George Washington. Now, militia refers to volunteers who choose to serve their country, usually with their personal arms. And so we know, based on that context, why, in part, the right exists and who it applies to. Now, for people who like to say, we need the Second Amendment, in case the government turns on its people, that they insist that that's why it exists. I disagree, because it says right there, it's necessary to the security of a free state. It exists for the security of the country, the security of the states. Now, just in case you have thoughts that maybe, it could also exist for that other reason, maybe that's true, but in my mind, most governments do not write their own self-destruct code. They do not like the idea of being overthrown. Alright, so now we'll get to the last part that people like to argue, and it's shall not be infringed. A lot of folks will insist that that means that any regulation is unconstitutional. But how can you have a regulated militia if regulation of the firearms is unconstitutional? I don't get it. Now, we also know that both before and after the Bill of Rights existed, we had gun control laws. They may not have been called that, but laws banning people from having a gun, and laws that gave the government the authority under situations to disarm a citizen. The standard is called the Dangerous Person Standard. It's been in effect for about 250 years or so. And that's why, even with an extremely conservative Supreme Court, regulations on firearms continues to exist because, believe it or not, they have an educational background in law. And yes, there are lawyers on the internet who disagree with that, but you'll notice they're trying to make money on YouTube instead of through their practice. Alright, so let's get back to the New York SAFE Act and the problems people have with it. You see, people were upset with a whole bunch of it. They've been piecemeal trying to strike down parts of it. They failed to strike down most recently the good moral character. Before that, they were trying to strike down the substance abuse part, the addiction part, because it goes a step beyond drug addiction, and it includes this. Now, it's worth noting that in the last year, we recently had a man convicted for second degree because he killed a teenager in his driveway while he was drunk and shouldn't have been holding a gun anyway. And he shouldn't have been allowed access to firearms. He was an insecure, paranoid alcoholic. Now, what's upsetting to people, good moral character, substance abuse, the DV provision, yes, hitting members of your family, can trigger the dangerous person standard in New York. These things upset people. The dangerous person standard applies when you demonstrate that you're a danger to yourself or others. And a lot of folks are upset that, maybe having multiple DUIs can trigger the dangerous person standard, and now they have to give up drinking in order to keep their firearms, or in order to get them back. They're upset that they get into an argument with their wife and it turns into a shoving match, and now, over something minor, they can't have a gun. And it's like, that's not something minor. You start hitting the person you're married to. Yes, pushing is hitting. We learned this in kindergarten. You trigger the dangerous person standard. You can't keep your hands to yourself, and we're supposed to trust you with the gun? So, like I said, it does apply to the people. But, there's a lot of folks who are upset that because of their own lack of self-control, the dangerous person standard can be applied to them. And so regardless of historical context, they'll insist that it's unconstitutional no matter what. And I think that's really telling. That this is more important to you, that you can't give it up in order to hold on to your rights, in order to be a responsible owner. That learning to control your anger and keep your hands to yourself is not important enough to you to preserve your rights. That being a safe person to be around is unacceptable. And that we're supposed to just go ahead and trust you, even though you demonstrate through your actions that you are not a trustworthy person. And that's just something I think it's important to think about. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments, and have a great day.